what I like to do, whether it's a Slough Creek or a Beckler Meadows or a Blackfoot River in Idaho, is I will go ahead and fish the bank furthest away from me and fish with a downstream drift. In other words, I put that fly ahead of me and use the current to get a natural drift and just keep on. It's almost like steelheading. You walk down through an area, take that fly, put it on the other side of the bank, let it drift close to the bank or into a hole. But
that was Bruce Staples describing how to target spooky Yellowstone cutthroat. We're getting an early start today as we head back into Yellowstone National Park. This is the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show.
Welcome to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show, where you discover tips, tricks, and tools from the leading names in fly fishing today.
Hey, how's it going today? Thank you for stopping by the Fly Fishing Show. If you get a chance right now, please take a moment and share this episode with another person or two that would like a little taste of Yellowstone National Park and some of the cool opportunities that are there. You can just click the link in your app and click that share button and copy that and send that out to somebody. Would appreciate that in advance. Bruce Staples, the author of multiple books on fishing the Yellowstone country and backcountry, takes us to the water today. Bruce breaks down some specifics on fishing high country, what the Leisenring lift is all about, the Yellowstone Sally, and other great patterns today. Plus, we get into a little bit on his dry muddler. Are you ready to dig into this one today? Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. Without further ado, here is Bruce Staples. How's it going, Bruce?
Well, pretty good. I'd rather be out fishing, though.
Yeah. Have you been doing any fishing this summer?
Yes, we have, but it's been a very tough year up here with the drought we've been having. It's particularly affected a lot of our smaller streams and irrigation reservoirs, the demand for agricultural purposes. But yeah, I've made it out.
Yeah, good. Well, we're going to dig into, you've written a number of books on Yellowstone and, West Yellowstone, the back, all sorts of Yellowstone books. We're going to dig into some of those books and some topics there. But before we get into all that and talk about deep into the fishing, talk about how you first got into fly fishing.
Well, I was, my profession, I was a process chemist out of the Idaho National Lab, and my colleagues got me into it. I first came out here, I was a bait fisherman, and they shamed me into fly fishing back in the early 70s. And of course, I took up fly tying afterwards, I was just, the combination just fascinated me. But this was back in the early 70s, mid 70s.
So when did you start thinking that you were going to write a book on, your first book? What was that first book?
Very interesting. It was called Snake River Flies and Waters and published by Frank Amato. And that was published in 1992, I believe. I ended up doing 3 books for Frank Amato between that date and 2003.
2003, yeah. And we had a great episode, had Frank on a while back. I'll link out to that one in the show notes. But how did you run into Frank? I mean, obviously he's been a staple out here. What was that interaction like when you first met him?
Well, I submitted my book proposal for the Snake River Country Flies and Waters to several publishers, and Frank was the only one who was interested in it. And he finally sent me a contract, and we took it from there. And I've had a couple other people that wish they'd signed a contract with me. But I just established a relation with Frank and his company, and it worked real well for many years. Nice.
I remember that book too. That's that book. I think I still have it on my shelf. I know I've had a few. I'm trying to think of the other book. I mean, obviously you got the Snake River, and then you got a lot of your other titles are focused on actual Yellowstone.
Well, yeah, I did. He had that series of books that he did, and I did in the series, their River Journal series, I did the Yellowstone Park edition for him. That was back in 96 or 98, somewhere right around in there.
Okay, 96 or 98, and you're still writing. So now you've written, And this most recent book just came out. So in, over 20 years, you've written, what do you have there? How many total books do you have out?
6.
Yeah, 6 books, exactly.
Yeah, 3 by Frank and 3 through Stackpole.
Right on. Well, today we're going to dig into a little bit on, just kind of some of the Yellowstone stuff. I was up there this summer and we had a good time. We didn't dig in. We did a little bit of hiking in the backcountry, but we didn't do a ton of it. I'm curious, when you say, the one book has backcountry in the title, what's the big difference between, say, when you write the book about Yellowstone backcountry versus just Yellowstone? Because it seems like a lot of Yellowstone's kind of the backcountry. What is the difference between those books?
Well, it was interesting. There's tons of information in the media about the icon streams, the Madison, the Firehole, the Yellowstone, Henry's Fork, et cetera, but nothing about backcountry. And in this area, the greater Yellowstone area, fly fishing is increasingly popular. And we've had a lot of people complain, they get to the Madison or the South Fork Reach of the Snake River and it's crowded. And, I spend a little bit of time down at Jimmy's All Seasons Angler here in Idaho Falls, and people were saying, find me a place where I got some tranquility, and less crowded conditions. And so I contacted Stackpole, and they right away, they didn't let me finish my sentence. They said, we're sending you a contract. Huh. This is back about, I'd say 2016, 2015. And that book was published in, Fly Fishing the Greater Yellowstone Backcountry was published in 2017.
There you go. Yeah. And that one you dug into. Let's talk about that book a little bit. So you dug into, how do you break that out? Because you got a lot of streams up there. Maybe just talk about that book and how somebody might utilize that one to, I guess you get away from some of the crowds.
Well, what I did was I organized it first in 4 large sections. The first one was Yellowstone Park backcountry. Next one would be Idaho. These are all part of the greater Yellowstone, so it would be eastern Idaho backcountry and Montana backcountry and Wyoming backcountry. Just did it that way. So it's in the 4 sections. And within that book, I express my experiences, my fishing experiences, do this, do that, et cetera, do it this time, these kind of things. But it's in kind of the essence of a guidebook. And in the front, I put a lot of the things that you need in the media to help you, where to stay, websites, things like that, just trying to keep things up to date. Whereas, in so many books, you don't see this, in front of every water that I discuss, there's information to get people onto the internet and look at various things, the shops, say accommodations, what flies to use, what equipment to use, et cetera, et cetera. That'd be individual for each water I discuss.
Gotcha. And for the backcountry, for Yellowstone, the backcountry section, how many water bodies did you talk about there? And was this mostly streams?
Oh, there's several in there. Like for instance, Fall River Basin or Shoshone Lake or Upper Slough Creek or in particular Heart Lake Basin. These places.
Gotcha. And I remember, Upper Slough Creek. We were in that area for a little bit. Maybe we can dig into that one a little bit. Do you
Sure.
really? I'm just thinking. When you think about Slough Creek, what should somebody? Let's go back to if somebody's planning a trip, to Yellowstone. Let's just say we're thinking of doing something here this next year.
Mm-hmm.
Where do they start? Could they just grab this book on the backcountry, and would that help them plan their whole trip?
Yes, this would help them plan and tell them who they need to contact. If they want to reserve a campground site, the campground on Slough Creek, it would tell them do this, do that. Go to the Yellowstone Park website and reserve that campground, place in that campground the date in which you want to stay there. The problem with Slough Creek is it gets very crowded. And so throughout the season, you're going to have a lot of company. Now, the further up you go in Slough Creek, the fewer people you'll have. But nevertheless, it's not like it used to be 25, 30 years ago. You're going to have plenty of company fishing, but there's a definite strategy for fishing it. And it's very similar to the Fall River Basin streams, Fall River and Beckler River, and even that short stretch of Heart River below Heart Lake.
Gotcha. So we're talking about, just for clarification, one species that we're looking at fishing for throughout this whole area?
I would say that book, particularly in Slough Creek, covers from the end of runoff, which is usually around the 1st of July, right up through September.
Okay. So that's when you're talking about planning it, you think the best time would be starting in July. You wouldn't want to start a trip before that? Well,
the best thing to do, just like I offer in the book, would be to contact the park and see what kind of shape Slough Creek is in. It's a runoff stream. A lot of the streams up here are runoff streams. This is high country. And so the thing you want to do is, as much as possible, find out when it begins, when its fishable season begins, and that depends on the snowfall we've had, the previous winter, of when you want to do your trip. There's times when you can go up there in end of June and it's in fishable conditions. There's other times when you got to wait till early July. You want to wait till runoff comes out of that stream, just like so many streams in the greater Yellowstone area. Anything that drains high country.
Okay. So that's the start of it. So first, make sure it's clear. But I guess if you're planning way ahead and getting the campgrounds, how far out do you have to reserve those campgrounds to make sure you have something?
I would say as early as you can, because, particularly like the last couple of years, the park has been extremely crowded. And so let's say that Dave Stewart's planning to be in Slough Creek in the second week of July. I would start the first of the year reserving a place in that campground.
Okay, and so you can't reserve it early, like right now you couldn't reserve it. You got to do it at the first of the year?
I don't think so. I think what happens is they begin their reservation system early in the year, but you can find this out through the Yellowstone Park website.
Exactly. Okay. So that's the first start where you would and I remember Slough Creek because we stayed there and it was super busy. And we actually ended up doing like day trips. We parked and then we hiked up the trail and had our stuff. And we got up there. It was really cool because although there was tons of people at the campground, we walked up the trail and we got out in the middle and we had a whole section to ourselves other than the bison. So is that the bonus of the backcountry, is that you can just get away from everybody?
Yeah, that's one of the things. You've got the tranquility you don't find in a lot of the streams with traffic. A good example, of course, is the Fire Hole and even the Madison this time of year when you got the Hebgen Lake run-up fish in there. Those places are crowded. And you get in the backcountry, and your chances of seeing somebody is, occasionally you might see somebody else in there that's looking for the same thing you are. You're looking for the tranquility. The big picture to me on fishing is not just catching fish. It's the total experience. In other words, the scenery, the tranquility, the fishing, that kind of thing. And the backcountry is, it's the best place to find that sort of thing. You just have to remember about the park, the only place where boats are allowed is on Yellowstone Lake and Shoshone and Lewis Lake. No other place in the park. It's all off limits to boats, for example.
That's right. Yeah, it's pretty unique. It's cool. So is the difference in fishing, say, versus Slough Creek up there, you hike up the trail in the upper, kind of the backcountry versus, say, lower Slough or even into some of the lower Lamar Valley. What's the difference as far as fishing? Are there a lot of similarities?
Well, they're all meadow streams, and so you use tactics. I don't care if it's Lamar or Slough Creek or Soda Butte Creek. They're all meadow streams, so you use those tactics. The thing is, the Lamar River, unless you get up there about 3 miles, and Soda Butte Creek, because it's right beside the road, they get crowded, whereas Slough Creek, you can get further up. It's just like, say, in the southwest corner of the park, Fall River and Beckler River. You walk a ways, and that eliminates a lot of people. But the tactics that you use on all those streams are all very similar. They're all meadow streams.
They're all meadow streams. What are some of those tactics? If you're going in there, let's say, I mean, I guess gear wise, you're probably using, some pretty normal trout, lighter trout stuff. And it's all, are you pretty much hitting, is this like mostly dry flies, like 90% dry flies, or are you mixing that up?
Well, early in the season, here's a strategy thing, and I talk about this in that Backcountry book, is early in the season, in the runoff streams, you get your food forms are mainly eroded from the banks, so you fish wet. Okay, when runoff starts receding, some of the first things that will start to come out will be your small stoneflies, and then you get into some of the mayflies, like PMDs are usually first to come out, and then depending on conditions, you get into the drakes. When this spans like from as soon as runoff gets out of the stream into, say, the middle of July or so. And then when you get past the mayfly peak, you start looking at, there's a few mayflies around, like speckled duns, and you get some damsels and things. But you start looking more, you tend more and more towards terrestrial insects. And I'm talking about meadow streams now, or anything that's bordered by a good overhead vegetation.
Gotcha. So yeah, you start, and then so the dry fly, it sounds like it's a good mixture. I mean, best thing there to do is, I mean, your book, you kind of cover all this a little bit of,
yes.
What the entomology piece. Yeah. How did you first dig into all this? And is this all self-taught stuff, or did you have, how did you, because the entomology is not always the easiest thing.
Well, it's not, but I had some people help me in this, particularly beginning with Bing Lemke, who's kind of the patron saint of Idaho fly tyers. And then, of course, Jay Buckner is one heck of a good entomologist, and a friend I just lost, Dr. Harley Reno. These people are all entomologists. They helped me out tremendously. But you've got to look at, there's some generalization things that early in the season, there's not that many mayflies in a lot of these streams. The fish get their food from what's eroded from banks. And, there's nymphs on the bottom, you get currents and the things, the streams are more turbulent that time of year. More things are sucked up or off the bottom and brought into the stream from bank erosion. So you start off the year with wet flies. And then gradually, as you lose your runoff in and this applies to an awful lot of streams up here in the greater Yellowstone area. But then as runoff recedes, then you start getting into active aquatic insects, whether it's stoneflies or caddisflies, which are the most popular, or most, in most of these streams, anywhere there's a little gradient, you find more of these than anything else. But yeah, as the season goes on, you switch into dry fly fishing. And it can be very effective if you know what you're doing.
Okay. And on those wet flies, when you say wet flies, do you mean actual wet flies, or are you talking about wet flies and nymphs, just anything below the surface?
Both. Anything, if you know the insect structure of your stream, what insects, what aquatic insects are there. There's flies that simulate those. But then also, life forms that are eroded into the stream, like it or not, earthworms. That's why woolly buggers are so effective. Grubs and things like that eroded in from the banks. So it's a combination for these fish. And you got to remember that they don't have to come to the top to get these. They're usually either close to the bottom or part way up in the water column.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, this is good. So there's, like you said, so going back, so early in the season, it's going to be higher, and those higher early season, you're kind of getting down. And then once that slows down and things calm down with the river, you start seeing some dry flies. How are you then pretty much fishing dry as all the rest of the summer till the fall?
Dry flies, and of course, life cycle patterns, particularly things like emergers and duns. The yellow sallies, they emerge right in the stream, so they're one of the first ones to come out almost everywhere. But yeah, I'm fishing, let's say, to the surface and not too far from it, not far below it.
Gotcha. Okay, and the yellow sally, which I've used before, let's describe that one a little bit. Do you know that bug? Is that one of the most popular ones that you would say, as far as kind of that time of year?
Well, it's one of the first in a lot of the meadow streams I fish. It's one of the first aquatic insects to emerge. That's why I mention it. And so it can be, life cycle forms of it can be very effective. And on the surface, something as simple as anything that imitates a caddis will work, or anything like that. There's several yellow Sally patterns around. Any kind of emerger, something as simple as a soft hackle of the right size will work. Soft hackle flies are extremely effective.
So the soft hackle fly would be, and so you're saying, I'm thinking of this dry fly that I've used in the past, this little yellow Sally, but you're talking coloration. Are we talking yellow?
Well, a lot of the colors depend on water chemistry. For instance, I don't know how much the yellow Sallies vary, but PMDs, the body color of PMDs of the duns vary depending on water chemistry. Like you go in the Henry's Fork and they're kind of I'd say a yellowish olive. Then the Fall River Basin streams are definitely chartreuse. A lot of that depends on the environment. I'd say almost, I'm overstating this a bit, but the chemical makeup of the water in which they're living.
Right. Yeah. No. The environment. Okay. So it's good to have a very. I mean, what is your fly box? If we were to look at your, your Yellowstone box, say this box you're taking up to this area on Slough Creek, what would that look like?
Okay, if it's say the peak season there, which is usually sometime in the first part of July, from there right on through September, you're going to have first, there's the drakes that come off up there early in the year, PMDs, Sallies, and this is typical of meadow streams. You're going to have those. I'd have life cycle patterns for those. And then as the season goes on, when some of the drakes start coming off, I'd have life cycle patterns for the green drakes, the brown drakes, and I'm talking July. Something like that, maybe even for damselflies. But early in the season, it would be the woolly buggers, maybe even streamers, and in particular, anything that imitates a dragonfly nymph. They're very popular or very sought after by trout early in the year. It's a big food form. And one thing you've got to remember about trout activity is conservation of energy. If they don't have to go very far to get food from, they're not going to do it. And the reason why they'll come to the surface is because if there's an emergence or something, a lot of food forms up there, they'll come to the surface. But if not, hey, they stay at the bottom and look for nymphs and anything that's floating down through the river or the stream.
There you go. Yeah, they're opportunistic. So, let's stay on that yellow Sally a little bit. So when you're talking, if you're fishing a soft hackle, how are you fishing? Like, is this a swing or how? Take us over. Let's take it to Slough Creek. Let's say you're fishing a creek like that. How would you fish that?
Well, I don't have that much experience early in the season on Slough Creek, but let me give you experience on Beckler River, which is essentially the same kind of water, but actually probably bigger and everything. What I'll do is if I see rises, I'll swing a soft hackle down to where I see a rise, and then, the old Leisenring lift, just that lift right in front of the rise. And that's where soft hackles are so effective. If you fish them there, just present them as an emerger, at least in my experience. And that works just about everywhere. I remember years ago using them on the Firehole River, and that's one of the most effective flies on the Fall River. I don't care whether it's for caddis or mayflies or what. It seems to be the same with yellow Sallies emerging. And I would say if you talk to people with a lot of experience, they'll say, well, it works for anything.
Mm-hmm. And the Leisenring lift, can you describe that, what that is exactly?
That'd be something where you drift the fly down to where a rise is. You could either swing it or just drift it, directly down. And as it moves down towards where the rise is, it sinks gradually in the water column, not very much, maybe an inch or two. Then when the fly gets down, you judge it gets down to where the rise is, you just gently raise the tip of your rod to simulate something, an insect emerging into the surface. And this is what's happening. You're simulating, an emerging insect.
There you go. And who was, do you know who Leisenring was?
He was a fly fisherman back in the middle 20th century that first described that technique. I'm sure it was around a long time before that, but he wrote books on it, as I remember.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, good. I'll have to dig up some of those old books there. And then you mentioned a few entomologists earlier on. Were those entomologists also fly fishermen?
Oh, definitely. Jay Buckner is a well-known professional out here. I don't know where he started out, but he had a shop. I can't remember the name of it. He started in Jackson Hole, and went through a series or one shop that has become very popular. Sold it, and now he does seminars on entomology and fly fishing technique in Jackson Hole. He was also a very well-known fly tyer too. But it's kind of Harley Reno was a doctorate level fisheries biologist that he guided some, but mainly recreational, and he developed fly rods and seminars, these kind of things. That's how I got to know Harley, through some of his seminars and fly tying demonstrations. But both of those guys Harley passed away back earlier this year, unfortunately, but Jay is going strong. He's essentially an authority on entomology in this area.
That's cool. Yeah. I've heard his name. We've kind of almost joked about it that our Rick Hafley was the person I know best from an entomology perspective. And, yeah, you remember Rick and
Hafley and Hughes.
Yeah, Hafley and Hughes, exactly. And I've been all these years, it's like you don't hear a lot of other entomologists. So I'm glad you mentioned a couple here. Jay Buckner, I'll try to track him down as well.
Yeah, he is a person worth talking to about stream entomology, at least, and I'm sure somewhat with still waters too. But he's a recognized authority on stream entomology.
All right. Well, what have you learned from his? Is one of those things where you just learn so much you can't even pinpoint, one thing? Is he?
What I've learned from him is what to expect. What species of mayflies and caddisflies are in certain kinds of water. Where you find, let's say, your ephemerellas. What kind of water you can expect them to be concentrated in, or say like the summer drake. Where and when you find that being active, what kind of water. And there's books, there's entomology books out here. Dr. Paul Needham, some of his books, he was a professor, and I'm not sure, I think it was back east somewhere, New Jersey, or could have been down in Utah for all I know. But it's a good idea. Some of the books that Schriebert wrote, that big volume of his Trout, that has entomological information in it. But I think it's a good idea to take a look at some of those to see what, it targets what kind of flies you want to use in a certain water.
Right. No, that's a huge pain point for people is they come to a new river or stream and they're like, okay, where do I fish? How do I read the water? And you're saying that this person shows you how to understand what bugs. Essentially, reading the water. When somebody asks you that, what do you tell them? Like, how do I read water? How would you tell them out there?
Well, it's a little complicated subject. It depends. If you're talking to an entry-level person, it's kind of like you relate it to the human experience. You say, hey, look, they're living in the deep water where there's less turbulence, just like you live inside to get out of the wind. But when you go to eat, you go somewhere else in the water. You go to where the food is, and that's usually the riffles and the runs, that kind of thing. So you go into your dining room, and when you want to do just plain living, just taking it easy, you go. When you want cover and protection, you go to your living room or your family room. There's parallels with human, the human experience. That's that's of course for an entry level person.
Yeah. Well, what about when you take it up to the next, like, kind of mid-level? How do you start changing that conversation with them?
The best thing to do then would be to take a person out to a stream. If they want to fish a stream, you take them out to a stream and you show them, here's where the fish are. Here's the way they work. They'll come in when the water temperature gets up to a certain spot and the insects get active. Then they'll move to this area to feed. Okay, you do something to disturb them, bang, they go back down into the deeper water. They're going to stay there, leave them alone, come back half hour later when they're active, this kind of stuff. But you tell them where the fish are going to be depending on what they're doing, in the water. And it applies somewhat to still water too. A lot of people fish too deep in a lot of still water. Well, hey, yeah, there's probably more dissolved oxygen there, but there's less food. So when they want to forage for food, they go to a shallower water.
Yep. Nice.
This is all brought out in that. Excuse me. Go ahead.
In which book?
Well, it's in the Backcountry book. This kind of strategy is all explained in that book. In general terms. The beginning of the book is pretty much general, stuff. It'll talk about these kind of things. Then we get into the subject of specific waters, where and how to fish specific waters.
So you do a deep dive for each of those water bodies. So you mentioned, what was the one you mentioned before? Not Slough Creek, but the one a little bigger than Slough that you fished that kind of has similar techniques?
Oh, this is Fall River Basin in the southwest corner of the park. Has probably, this is debatable, of course, but you've got to go there. The thing of it is it's like Slough Creek. You got to walk away to get into the best of what the area has. But it's essentially Fall River Basin. And the major streams would be Beckler and Fall River, Mountain Ash Creek, and Boundary Creek. And, of course, the lakes would be the lakes at the head of Fall River, Beulah and Herring. These are all backcountry waters. You have to walk a little bit to get into them. They're not difficult walks, but it takes time. But the thing you got to remember is when you're in high country fishing, water temperatures it takes a while for water temperatures to get up for the aquatic insects to be active. And it's the same thing with air temperatures and the terrestrial insects. It takes time for them to become active. So if you're in particular a dry fly fisherman, you don't have to be there at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. You wait till things warm up. So let's say you got to walk 3 miles. So what's that? Maybe an hour and 15 minutes. You time yourself so you get into when the insects are active, whether aquatic or terrestrial. That's usually when the sun's up and things have warmed up, whether it's water or the banks or anything like that. So, yeah, a lot of these backcountry waters, that's part of your strategy is, hey, take time to walk in. It's not going to affect your fishing. The fishing doesn't improve until both the air and the water temperature gets up to a level where everything's active.
I guess depending on when let's just take it to that. So again, the yellow sowie, when you're fishing those wet flies, that would be kind of a like later July, August sort of thing?
They're one of the first things on these meadow streams, on several of the meadow streams to emerge. And that's usually after your runoff decreases, gets down to the point the water temperature warms up, clears up. And everything that depends. That's usually, like I say, end of July or the end of June, first part of July, and that so much depends on how much snowfall there's been and what kind of weather conditions you got going on in the spring.
Yeah, it all depends, but that's a good one to have in your box. And so when you're fishing that again, so you're at the stream. You're seeing some risers. Are you kind of working little specific sections, or are you kind of working your way down through an area? Are you typically working downstream or upstream on these things?
Well, I typically look downstream, and a lot of it is getting a good downstream drift. And like I say, with a soft hackle to where the rises are, we've talked about the soft hackles. And sallies are not particular to meadow streams. Of course, there's some areas, streams with gradient or something where they're even more concentrated. But I just mentioned them because they're one of the first insects to emerge after runoff in a lot of the meadow streams around the greater Yellowstone area.
Yeah, no, that's good. I'm glad you. And then, so as you get in, like you said, you mentioned some of those other insects that we can dig into your book.
No, I'm going to say all of that is in that Yellowstone Backcountry book. And it starts out being general, but then it gets specific as we go through the Yellowstone Park waters, East Idaho, Southwest Montana and Northwest Wyoming waters. We get specific for, some of the backcountry waters.
And you literally covered every single backcountry water that's out there.
Let's put it this way. There's some that I didn't. And, I was limited, like any publishing company, they're going to limit you as to how much you can do. And each water, I want to have some essence in there for people to, get some knowledge from. So I couldn't cover every water, but I covered what I thought would be significant waters.
Gotcha. And who is for a second? I've been curious. I've been hearing this name. We've had a few episodes. We had some big sky anglers on, talked a little bit about West Yellowstone. We did a Henry's Fork episode, but I'm curious. Bob Jacklin is somebody we haven't had on. Can you talk about Bob? Why he seems like he's a big name out there. Talk about how you know him.
He's an icon, and I got to know Bob just because I would go to West Yellowstone, the town of West Yellowstone, and from there go to fish various parts of the, park waters. And also, the Federation of Fly Fishers, now known as Fly Fishing International. I met Bob through many of the conclaves that that organization had in West Yellowstone. But I met Bob, and essentially we became friends. But Bob has been he's a very interesting story. He started out in New Jersey, and after he got out of the service, he'd drive to the greater Yellowstone area, Yellowstone Park, and fished. He always wanted to do this when he was younger, but when he was able to get out and drive out, he'd drive out and fish in the summers. This was back in the late 60s or so. He'd drive out in the summers and go back to Jersey in the fall. This is typical. A lot of people go to school or work or whatever, then come out the next year. And he got so interested in it that Bud Lilly hired the guy as a guide and a fly tyer. And eventually Bob had enough experience and exposure to begin his own business in the middle 70s. He'd make a very good interview for you sometime. But through that, he just became an icon there. He's, I think his shop, essentially what happened was he bought Pat Barnes' tackle shop back in the early 80s. And this kind of increased his business into, international status, so to say, that Pat had built. And of course, and this last book that I did, Fly Fishing West Yellowstone History and a Guide, that history, Bob's history, Craig Matthews' history, Bud Lilly's history, et cetera, it's all in that book.
So you have not only that we've been talking about this backcountry book, a little older book, but this new book you have goes into. So this is all the history of how far back of the history do you go in that book?
Well, with respect to the greater Yellowstone area, I go back essentially to the turn of the 19th century when there was no town essentially. People would come out here and go in the backcountry and fish, by horseback and maybe local guides, this sort of thing. But there was no fly fishing community established. But as time went on, that community developed, and we follow that through. The development of West Yellowstone is essentially today it's the icon fly fishing community. It wasn't, say, back in the 30s and the 40s when, your Catskill fishermen were around. But now it is, and also besides the history in that book, we discuss the major waters, and there's also a section with about 200 of the famous flies that have come out of West Yellowstone. It's more of an interest to a guy that wants to know who was here before me. Why have I got why do I have what I have here fishing? Who was here before me? Who established this? It's more for the person that's interested in that, whereas a backcountry book is for the guy that wants to get out and catch fish in a tranquil situation.
There you go. Yeah, they both sound great. And are you now, where are you located now?
Idaho Falls, Idaho.
Yeah, you're in Idaho Falls. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so you're right in that area. And I remember we came through there. I guess we were, the fires, right? You've been seeing some of that. Has it been kind of a every every summer of the fire has been kind of there every summer the last few years?
Yeah, there's been times when the fires have closed down certain places to fish, like you up here in southwest Montana in Centennial Valley, the area up above Elk Lake was closed for a good length of time because of a fire up by Hidden Lake. These are really icon waters. They're a little bit out of the beaten path. You've got to go through gravel roads and everything, but some of these waters were actually closed because of the fires. People setting up facilities and everything and fighting the fires themselves. They kept the public out just because of dangers. And of course, this year the other problem was we've had an ongoing drought. We had a very dry spring, and for example, a lot of the waters were closed in Montana. They established this hoot owl closures where you couldn't fish. You could only fish certain times a day. Now that happened a lot in Montana, not so much in Idaho. A good example was they closed a couple creeks completely to protect, like West Slope cuts and grayling from people fishing them just because the water was so low and warm in these areas. Effects of the drought.
Exactly. Yeah, the drought has been kind of tough. Well, let's circle back around. I want to kind of start to wrap us up here in a little bit, but we have a little segment called the 222 Top Flies, Tips, and Resources. And if we stick to, like we were talking about, a little bit more of that backcountry stuff, maybe it's Upper Slough Creek or any of those streams. I mean, is it pretty much, if you think any of those upper streams where you hike into, is it the same selection? I mean, pretty much doesn't matter where you are in the park. It's kind of the same.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a lot of similarities. This is all high country, and so when fish in these streams become active is very similar. Doesn't matter, all these streams are 6,000 feet or higher, and so, your air temperature and your weather conditions, they affect all these streams in the same way. And your fly selection, I think, fly selection is so subjective. If you ask me, what patterns would you have, Bruce? Well, I've got a favorite pattern that imitates both stoneflies and hoppers and larger life forms like the insect life forms like that. It's called a dry muddler, and I have that everywhere I go. And but as I say in that backcountry book, if you learn the progression of terrestrial and aquatic insects, you take life cycle patterns for those. And I mentioned something like soft hackle patterns. They're great for almost any aquatic insect, emerging aquatic insects, I should say. But you've got to know what the aquatic insects and terrestrial insects are on each area. And then you go and find or accumulate, fly patterns for the life cycle of those insects. All those meadow streams are similar. I don't care whether it's Slough Creek or Beckler River or the Upper Blackfoot River here in East Idaho or some of the smaller streams around that are meadow streams. There's similarities. There's so many similarities on what kind of flies you should be using. Early in the season, you use, like I say, the woolly buggers and the streamers, and then you go to the aquatic insect streams when the runoff water clears out or the water itself warms up, in the summer or spring. Then back in the fall, you go back to the streamers, because the brown trout are active and the rainbows are following them. There's a whole array of flies that you use depending on where you're going, what the stream is like, and what part of the season you're fishing. That's part of the fascination of fly fishing.
Yeah, it is. It seems like it's definitely, there's so much to it. You could go as deep as you want, or you can go to, like we kind of joke about it sometimes, like the Euro nymphs, that don't really look like anything necessarily. You might just get a hot pink spot in a slim fly. Do you see, people using those up there quite a bit now? Are you doing any like dry dropper stuff?
I do a little bit, but not much. I do, dry dropper fishing. Mostly, since you mentioned, I mostly do that in still waters. But these techniques are great if you use them under the right conditions. So many times presentation overwhelms fly selection. You've got to present these flies in the right manner. We hear drag free on the surface and everything. Then even under the surface, you've got to make a fly active or fish at dead drift, depending on what the predominant life form is doing, how it acts, what you're trying to imitate. It's a lot different than bait fishing when you just drift a night crawler into a hole, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned, let's grab one more fly. So you mentioned the dry muddler. I know there's a lot of variation, but if you're going to take another go-to fly in your box, what else if you had to throw another one out there?
Okay. If it were going to be a wet fly, my favorite is a fly called a Peacock Leech. What it is, it's a woolly bugger tied with a peacock body and a gold bead in front and ginger hackle and ginger marabou. And I'll vary the size on this depending on what the life form is I'm trying to imitate. But that fly is just so versatile. It can imitate a leech. It can imitate a dragonfly nymph if it's large enough, or a damselfly nymph. It can even imitate something like a minnow, or it depends how you present it and where you present it. But that would be the second fly. That would be a wet fly I'd have in my fly box. When it comes to streamer fishing, I particularly like soft hackle streamers. They're essentially soft hackle flies tied with marabou feathers. You put a bead on them so they get down deep, this kind of thing. So those would be three of my favorite flies right there. Another one that I like, some of these emerger patterns, some of the Harrop patterns are superb patterns, for imitating different parts of insect life cycles.
There you go. And how are you fishing that Peacock Leech, or a woolly bugger? How would you fish that early in the season?
Well, in still waters, I'll use it, like I say, in smaller sizes, imitate a damselfly nymph. Or, if it's early in the season, a little bit larger, like about a size 4 or something, imitate a dragonfly nymph. Early in the season, dragonfly nymph patterns are extremely effective, especially in still waters. You can imitate a leech. One of the best places around the greater Yellowstone area to use leeches are beaver ponds, active beaver ponds. All you got to do is wade wet in a beaver pond. You'll see why leechers are so popular. But anything that's versatile. Dry muddler is a versatile pattern because it can be used and tie in certain colors to imitate grasshoppers, even crickets, and also any kind of large stonefly like a golden or a pteronarch, any of those. Any fly that can imitate different life forms at different times is something that everybody should consider. And we all end up having their favorites. The ones I mentioned are mine. And that's based on experience. That's based on.
And what about a couple of tips? If we're talking, so we're fishing, out there, let's say take us to, again, that July, earlier part of the season. What would you tell somebody if they're out there trying to catch a few fish? Would you give them a tip or two?
Okay. The one thing you got to remember, the fish are there 24/7. So when they look up past the water towards a bank, when they see that, when they see those things, they see a bank that's pretty much the same. But then all of a sudden, here's a person 6 foot tall that's standing there. Okay, that's unusual. So what happens is that essentially puts them down. The thing you want to do is long casts, keep away from the banks as much as possible. What I like to do, whether it's a Slough Creek or a Beckler Meadows or a Blackfoot River in Idaho, is I will go ahead and fish the bank furthest away from me and fish with a downstream drift. In other words, I put that fly ahead of me and use the current to get a natural drift and just keep on. It's almost like steelheading. You walk down through an area, take that fly, put it on the other side of the bank, let it drift close to the bank or into a hole, but try to stay as much as possible, at least 30 feet away where their vision isn't as effective. So, you want to not disturb what they see 24/7 is what I'm saying.
That's a good tip. So basically in 30 feet, that's a good distance. So
Yeah,
and you're kind of
at
fishing
least.
downstream and across.
Yeah. Or even the same bank, fish it downstream, below you, everything like that. Drift with the current.
There you go. Or just, oh, right. So just drift down. So get it out towards the bank and then just let the current naturally just drift it down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then you might have to, follow it down, walk down, but you're away from that water. If the fly's, that distance away, the chances of them seeing you diminish.
Yeah, that's the thing, so you don't want to just walk right out, into the creek and spook the fish.
Yeah.
And are you typically fishing in these runs, or these little runs, you're looking for some structure under there, just like normal, something that they could hold around?
Well, cut banks. That's a great piece of cover for a fish. Get underneath a cut bank, or even the head of a pool, because if something startles them, they can get back under the bank, or they can get back into that pool. So that kind of structure, in stream stuff, like a downed tree or something, that's overhead cover. Anything that looks like overhead cover, or in the stream cover, like boulders or something, they'll sit behind something very large, like a large boulder. Just there's less turbulence right behind it. So you look for submerged structure as well as above the surface structure.
Okay. And do you want to give us maybe one more tip again? So we're out there in this area. We've got we're looking for cover. We're swinging it down the bank. You're using that the Leisenring lift, right? Anything else you throw out there if you're fishing maybe that soft hackle?
Well, that happens. I use that when there's an emergence going on, pretty much. When the fish are active, going to the surface, picking things off. A lot of what they pick off is just below the surface. That's where a soft hackle can be particularly effective, is, something that's approaching the surface. So you got to remember, for that insect to break the surface takes a lot of energy. And so, getting past the surface to fly away is difficult for these insects in general. And so there's like a place where they pause, and that's when the fish will sit there and grab them when they're doing that. So, yeah, that is something when there's an emergence going on, a soft hackle can be extremely effective to imitate, say, an emerging insect.
No, it's effective, and just the wet fly swing. So I'm curious, thinking a little more about just the area itself. I know when we were there this year, it was pretty spectacular. What's kept you, like when you think of Yellowstone, there's so much going on there. Is there one thing that really sticks out to you that makes you really love that area, or something somebody who hasn't been there before, what would you tell them?
Well, you've got to, everybody should at least try the Icon waters, the Madison, the Henry's Fork, the South Fork reach of the Snake River, Firehole. Give them a try. But the thing is you're going to find that there's a lot of human activity going on, whether it's people wading or people boating. And so many of these backcountry waters, there's no boating. It's impossible. How do you get a boat into Slough Creek? Other than, of course, it's illegal anyways. But you eliminate a lot of the human traffic by going in the backcountry. And so I would say that, give those areas a try, but look at any book or anything in the media that describes backcountry waters, because in general, you're going to have, if you look at the big picture, the scenery, the tranquility, the good fishing, you're going to have a more interesting experience. Yeah, sure, there's some of them, these places you're going to have to expend some time and some energy to get to, but it's darn well worth it. But look at the strategy gems about, hey, things aren't active in there till a certain time. This is high country. It takes time for things to warm up to a point where food forms are active. It's all in that backcountry book, and it's in some of the other books around too.
Gotcha. All right, what is that book like on Amazon or wherever? What's that book run? The backcountry book?
These books, Stackpole prices them all. They're all about $30, something like that. They're not the $50-$60 books, and they're all pretty much soft cover. But there's a lot of information about, if you're coming to the greater Yellowstone area, about selecting places to fish other than the Icon waters. And there was nothing else in the media produced that was like this. And so, like I say, when I proposed this to Stackpole, the fellow I was working with, he didn't let me finish my sentence. He says, "Hey, I'm sending you a contract right now. I see what you're talking about. There's nothing out there. This is new territory. So let's go ahead and do it."
There you go. And what is that when they send that contract to you? What is that typically? Is that just basically saying you have a certain amount of time and to finish this?
Yeah, a certain amount of time. We not know more than these number of words. Like, let's say 100,000 words is your cap. If you go over a couple thousand, no problem. But, not another 100,000 or 50,000, but that, and that you will, at this time you will do this. You'll present us a preliminary draft at this time, and a final draft. We will review it. Then you make revisions, and the final draft will come out. We want to see that. At this date, this kind of thing. There's a time sequence in there. And all you do is just agree to it and take it from there. But the 3 books I've done for Stackpole, that's how they work.
There you go. And I remember asking this question a long time ago to John Gierach we had on. I asked him what it felt like when his next book comes out. What's it feel like for you when you get this last new book or the first one? How does that feel?
Well, you get a sense of accomplishment. And one of the things I want to do is I've had a lot of experience fly fishing in the greater Yellowstone area. I want to pass my experience on. I want to share it with people that I think have values. And most fly fishermen are pretty astute people with respect to, hey, I've got to take care of this water if I want to enjoy it or if my family wants to enjoy it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it helps, in particular, the person who's looking at coming to this area. Where do I fish? How do I fish? And when do I fish? And for the person with experience, it opens up another avenue of where they can go and where you see more of the big picture, which includes, good fishing, tranquility, and good scenery.
And good wildlife, right? Have you seen some pretty amazing wildlife?
Oh, yeah. That's yeah. There's times you got to be, like I give comments or suggestions on how to behave in bear country, what to do in bear country. That's in that Backcountry book. It's essential to that book.
That's right. Yeah, bears. You've seen, how about wolves? Do you see many wolves out there?
Yeah, but, they're a little different. I've had 1 or 2 wolves experience. I had one in Beckler Meadows, which is, I consider to be rather humorous. And I've had a couple of grizzly bear experiences. I had a grizzly bear experience on Duck Creek that I'll never forget. The bear was huge, but he was almost like domestic. People that live in subdivisions around there had seen him before. But you got to be aware of the wildlife. Of course, buffalo can be awfully dangerous, too. I remember getting trapped on a bend on the Firehole River years ago while there was a herd of buffalo right down where I wanted to cross the stream. My fishing partner and I wanted to cross. We had to wait till they got out of the way. So yeah, up in this neck of the woods, you got to be aware of wildlife, and I talk about that in the book too.
Yeah, it sounds like you cover a little bit of everything. Is the buffalo the biggest danger there? Is that they kind of just stampede sort of thing? Or what is the biggest danger?
Well, the biggest danger is getting too close to them. And I mean, like within 50 yards or something, not 50 feet. Hey, they look at you as an intruder. And if they're protecting calves or if the bull is, getting ready for a rut or is in a fighting mood or something, hey, you're in danger. Every year we have experiences with particularly buffalo where people get too darn close to them. But it can happen with elk. It can happen with moose. It can happen with anything. So, you avoid, you're the intruder. This is really their country, and you coming in, you're the intruder.
You're the one that needs to get out of the way. We noticed that when we were there because we were on the Lamar River, and there is some, a herd around us, and we were sitting there in we were fishing this little stretch, and there's this buffalo that was on the other bank, like 40 feet away, waiting for us to get out of the way, and it could have just walked across. But it waited until we got up and we finished fishing, and then we left. And after that, it waited right across where we were. So it seemed like that one was being pretty polite, but you're saying they're not always like that.
That's exactly right. It's just like the human race. There's renegades and there's people that are considerate. Same thing. they have to kill bears once. They had to kill a grizzly up here back in the spring because he really, I can't remember if it was fatal or not, but I think it was, come to think of it, right up here by Baker's Hole Campground, just outside of West Yellowstone. He was fishing and the bear attacked him. But the bear was, I can't remember whether it was protecting a carcass or protecting cubs. I just don't remember. But see, you don't know. So the best thing to do is to keep away from these animals.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's just take it out. Let's finish up that the 222. So we talked a lot about your books. We'll put all links to all of your books there. What about another resource? If somebody's planning a trip right now and they want to get into the fishing and get things dialed, any other like books, magazines, videos, other resources you'd recommend that aren't your own? Are yours the main ones that are out there?
You know, the thing about magazine articles are really interesting. A lot of the guys that write these, they've got a date when they've got to produce and have an article in there. So a lot of times it's easier for them to go to a water that's adjacent to a road. Go ahead and fish that or talk to people that are fishing it rather than going into the backcountry. That takes time. And there's uncertainties with respect to weather, and there's dangers with respect to not just weather, but even wildlife. We just mentioned that. One of the best things to do, I would think, would be consult with any shop that has integrity with respect to the information they give out. Consult with the shop. What's written a lot of times. I don't subscribe to any magazines anymore because I've seen so many distortions and mistakes. And it's like Bud Willy says. He says if he wants to see the size of a trout, he has to look at him. He doesn't look in a magazine because they tend to be, the size of the trout out here tend to be distorted in a positive way.
Oh, Roy.
Yeah, just to sell a copy. But the best thing to do, I would say, would be consult with a shop with high integrity. And there's several shops that I don't want to mention specific ones because I'm sure I'll leave some out. But you look at their websites. And then if necessary, or if you want to, you can talk to people. And there's people in these shops that want to give you good information, solid information, because you'll become a customer. You'll become part of the clientele. But beware of the guy that's sitting there telling you how big the fish are and, oh, I had this experience, that experience. Talk to the guy that's going to tell you, if you're coming out this time of year, do this, do that. Don't come this time of year. Come this time of year because certain things are happening that make the fish more active. He's going to give you information like that. There's several shops in the area that you can find. Usually they have pretty extensive websites with a lot of information on them. And people are willing to talk to you.
Perfect. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there for this one, Bruce. Maybe just give us a heads up in the next 9 months or so. Anything new coming up for you? You want to give a shout out? Any other books coming up in the works?
I've got a couple ideas, but I just don't know. These companies, what they want to do, these publishing companies, they want books that are going to sell. And luckily, the books that I've done from at least the last two and maybe the first one are still selling. But they're going to look at something and say, well, we don't think that's going to sell. It's like this West Yellowstone history book. I submitted the first draft of that almost 10 years ago. They turned me down. And then Stackpole was bought by a company that had a different philosophy. They want to include the history of, outdoor activities. I don't care whether it's backpacking or, rock climbing or fly fishing or what. And so they told me, let's go ahead and do that history book in West Yellowstone. And come to find out, it's selling very well.
That's great. Give us a little one from that story. You talk about your history and stories. Give us a unique story, something from the history that we might not know about from the last couple hundred years in West Yellowstone. Anything stick out to you, like a kind of a good, funny, crazy story or anything?
Well, to me, the thing I found interesting was the succession of advocates in West Yellowstone. It started out becoming a destination, gee whiz, probably back in the early 20th century. But the succession of people from the Vint Johnsons and the Don Martinezes to the Pat Barnes and the Bud Lees to the Greg Matthews and the Bob Jacklins, I found that fascinating. And the question becomes, well, who's going to succeed these guys to keep the tradition going for that town? I found that fascinating.
Ah, that's a pretty big shoes to fill. Is Bob? So Bob Jacklin's still there. He must be.
Yeah, he's still there. Blue Ribbon Flies has been sold. Craig Matthews sold it back in 2015, and of course, let's see, Eric Swanson. He's still active. He started back in the 90s. But what's the succession going to be like? And of course, with respect to me personally, fishing, starting out in the Icon waters and discovering these backcountry waters that were just offered just as good, if not better, experience. That progression, that started back in the 70s back in the 80s when I found Heroin State Park to become so crowded, forced me into the Beckler Meadows, Fall River, Upper Slough Creek, Blackfoot River areas. That was fascinating personally, just to see that succession.
Cool, and we could, I guess, like we said, we'll dig into some of your books that we want to follow up. So, okay, Bruce, well, I'll send everybody out to, I guess where would be the best place to send them if they want to pick up your book right now? Where would you send them?
You can get it through Amazon. You can get it through most of the fly shops in the backcountry here. I mean, in the greater Yellowstone area, and it's around the country. But I don't know the distribution, where you can find it outside of the greater Yellowstone area. You might have to contact somebody in Stackpole. They're the publisher. But almost all the shops in this area would have it, and it's just a matter of a phone call or an email or something if you have it. But most of the shops will ship it to you, $29.95 plus postage, which is usually just a few bucks. But Jimmy's All Seasons Angler here in Idaho Falls, Blue Ribbon Flies in West Yellowstone, et cetera, et cetera. Shops like this, shops with integrity.
Yeah, no, that's great. Okay, perfect. Well, we'll leave it there for now, and I'll definitely be picking up a copy of this, but we're going to hopefully get out there again this next summer and probably get out a little earlier. It sounds like, I'll check in with them. And but yeah, Bruce, until we meet again, thanks for taking the time today and shedding some light on all this and all the good work you've been doing over the years.
Well, I apologize for the razzmatazz getting onto this scene, but I didn't have a lot of information on how to do it. And other than that, I enjoyed talking with you, Dave, and keep in touch.
So there you go. If you want to find all the show notes, all the links, and everything else we covered today, head over to wetflyswing.com/269. That is 269, 269er. Please subscribe if you get a chance, if you haven't already. If you're new to the show and you want to follow this show, get the next episode delivered right to your inbox, you can just click that subscribe button, and just like magic, it drops in when this episode goes live, usually first thing in the morning. And first thing in the morning on this Thursday, we have another Planet Protect, which we're calling Planet Protect, the series that dives into some of the large conservation issues around the country and the world. This week, Thursday, is the Everglades Foundation. We've got a podcast where we dig into that big issue that's going on. So really interesting stuff. Steve Davis, a scientist from that area, talks about it. So click that subscribe button. You'll get updated when it goes live. I want to just say thanks again. Thank you for listening all the way till the end here and supporting the show. Appreciate you for being out there, and hope to maybe catch you online here or maybe on the river.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.